Chodesh Tov, everybody. Today
Morning.
Morning.
we're continuing on today with the Gemara Eruvin Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. We were discussing the case of where you have majority of the walls are of the area not actually being proper walls. So we discussed the case of walls that are made up of many entrances and many windows, and we concluded that it's no good when the doorways and the windows aren't done properly. When they're pitchei shemai, that's when we have run into the issue of harut murbal omed. But if they're done properly, as in they've got a properly finished window, they've got a lintel on top. It looks like they were intentionally built that way. Then we would again it would be considered to be as if it's omed with both parts, that there's more standing there is not there, even though there isn't. So now we're trying to figure out, now we're going to continue on in that vein. Now we're getting to a case of where there's even less of walls. So we're on the bottom of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. V'af Rabbi Yochanan savar la lahadirav. So even Rabbi Yochanan agrees that of Rav, that there is a limit to the maximum width the maximum width of, we had a question of a pet, if you have by the entry you can only up to 10, more than 10 is considered to be a pirza, no good. The question is does that same thing apply to Tzurat Badech or not? So the Amar, so now we're going to see the support to see what Rabbi Yochanan's opinion is. The Amar Rabin Bar Avada Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Ma'asav Adam Echad Mibikat Bet Korton Shenatz Arba Kundesin Arba Pinat Hasadeh Matas Mor Alihen. So once we had here we go. So let me share a diagram because that'll be very helpful for understanding what we're talking about. So there was a case where there was a farmer in Beit Horton, which might be the Beit Horon area, like in Israel. So it's basically somewhere in Israel. So basically, this farmer had this great idea for how he'd be able to, in diagram number 142, for how he'd be able to differentiate between the different regions of his field for kilayim, because normally you have to have a certain degree of space, as we mentioned, I think it was on Daf Hey, about there being, you have to differentiate between the regions of different types of seeds and plantings. For purpose of kilayim, so he had this great idea that he'll make representative walls on around the area of the difference between the areas of different seeds, and that'll mean that he won't need to have as large of a gap between places that he plants, because this would create there being a halachic wall to differentiate between the different types of seeds, and that way you wouldn't need to have something else, right? So as it says here, so you see here there's Aleph. See the diagram here. There's an aleph and there's a bet. So underneath the aleph is where the inside of the place where the four posts were planted, and then there's the vine running over the top of the four posts. So that's the place where you'd be planting where the vineyard is, and then on that so that's aleph, the area inside, and then bet is the area where you'd be planting your seeds on the outside, right? Because you can't if you cross planting, you would be violating the issue of kilayim, but by creating these walls, it allows them to be closer than they would have been otherwise. So that was the case. So this farmer had this great idea for kilayim. So then V'amar Reish Lakish, and now we're saying, okay, now we're saying, what else does this type of wall work? So V'amar Reish Lakish, Keder she'tiru lo l'inyan kilayim, kaki tiru lo l'inyan Shabbat. Just like this is a valid wall for separating out kilayim, it's also a valid wall for Hilchot Shabbat, meaning for the purposes of Eruvin in general, this is considered to be a valid wall. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, the kilayim hitiru lo, in Shabbat lo hitiru lo. Right, so Rabbi Shalakish says that sort of patach, you have four sort of patachs, even though you have part murbal omed, right? So just like from this case we had by kilayim, where it's the same thing by Eruvin, and you can have four walls of sort of patachs, and that's perfectly fine. Rabbi Yochanan on the other hand says no. They only allow this for kilayim because kilayim would require a different degree of separation than Shabbos, but we wouldn't allow this to work for Shabbos. So now we're trying to figure out what exactly did he do and how did he build the structure? Because depending on how you built the structure is very relevant for, if you want to utilize Surah Petach, what does it need to look like? Because this is a case where basically you just have 4 thin poles and a vine over a vine running over it. So the question is, well, how do we make sure that we build this properly so we can follow the way that he had been doing it as well? So, Abamayaskin on Elam Minatzad. So what's the case? If you want to say that he ran over that when he ran the vines, he ran it not over directly over the top, rather he did it basically in the middle, right? So diagram 144. So you could either, right? So when you're running a vine, you either run a vine over the top of the pole, or you can simply let it run over about halfway and then lead the vine over to the other one. You can also do about half, a little bit farther down. You don't have to do it over the top exactly. So they did it. So the way they did it. So the question is, did they do it over, as it looks from this picture, which was directly over the top, or do it from the side? And if you're curious about what we're talking about, if it wasn't in terms of volume, in terms of a wooden plank. So the example of that is found in 145. Right, that's the min hatzad. Right, you have 2 planks, and then you nailed the cross beam. As opposed to putting it on top, which is how you would normally do construction. But just a slight construction note, if you ever are trying to build a lintel and you want to properly distribute the weight above the area, it would have to be rested on top of the posts. If you did on the side like this, and you tried resting anything on top of the cross beam, it would most likely break because the only thing holding together are the nails, and the nails are probably not going to be strong enough for the purposes of whatever you're building. So also, if you're building a sukkah, do not make that mistake because that could lead to your sukkah actually falling down. Okay, now back to Eruvin. So, right, so if you did from the side, and so you built from the side. So what does that mean if you built from the side? What does that mean halachically? So Hamar Chisda Surah Petach Shasa'amin Atzad Lo Asav Lo Klum. Right, so if you did a Surah Petach from the side, you didn't do anything. You didn't build You haven't built an Eruv yet. All you've done is build. All you've done is right. All you've done is put a post on the side. That's not a proper structure because that's not the way you build. Or because it would, right? So that's the problem. So now, by the way, what do you do then? Because if you did it from the side, that's not a valid sort of petach. Because that's similar to what we'd had by the kitchen building entrances in the corners. Like people don't build that way. So if you build in a way that's not worthy for building, it's an invalid building structure. So Ella al-Gaban, rather he did it on top of that. So therefore, it would be like the way you normally build a doorway. So b'mai ilam b'aser v'halem Rabbi Yochanan v'Shabbat. If you want to say that the distance of the posts were more than 10, and so this is exactly what we had before. That we knew that Rabbi Yochanan that on Shabbos it didn't allow that didn't work. Rather, what is the case here that's teaching us? Is that this case is actually this case is where the posts are more than 10 apart for the Surah Petach. So if we're teaching us that you can have a wider gap, and now Rabbi Yochanan says it limits 10 all of Surah Petach. Hello, Olam Baser, Minatzad, rather no, that actually the case that we say Rabbi Yochanan has a problem with is the case of where it's 10 wide and it's on the side, and then really the only question is whether or not you hold the Rav Chis to say that Minatzad has a problem or not. That's the question. Rami Rabbi Yochanan, Rami to Rish Lakish and Rish Lakish. So now we got a problem because now basically we have Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish being inconsistent in their opinions. So what's the inconsistency of Rish Lakish? Dam Rish Lakish, Mishum Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Chanina, turning the page. Hey Muterel Inyan Kilayim Abolo Shabbat. So that if you had, so what's Rish Lakish quoting the name of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Chanina, that you had a braid of vines done on poles, right? But we talked basically our case of the kundus that we had above. That works for kilayim. I'm a little Shabbat. So here, in this case, Rish Lakish seems to be saying that it works for Kilayim but not for Shabbos, and Rabbi Yochanan says it doesn't work for either. Now we're like, wait, now both those, now you can't. So wait, so that means that everybody's opinion we had until now was wrong. So Bishlam of the Rish Lakish, lo kasha. Hadidei Hadirabei. So we can explain right here where Shlakish says what he says, like when he's quoting the opinion of it not working for Shabbos but only for Kilayim, because you could say it's not his opinion. He quoted in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Rabbi Chanina. So those are his Rebbeim, but that's not his opinion. His opinion is that it works. Right, El Rabbi Yochanan, under Rabbi Yochanan, gotcha. But what about Rabbi Yochanan? Like, he says in one case that it works for Kilayim, like it doesn't even work in Kilayim. So which one is it? So what you could say, the two cases are different. That the case where it's good for Kilayim and for Shabbos is when it's done on top, which could be a valid sort of head down. I mean, it's a chop here, but here you did it on the side, and if you try making it sort of on the side, according to nobody is that considered to be a valid sort of padlock, a valid doorway. So, but rather, if you're saying that both cases are from the are talking about when you put it from the side, how could you differentiate? Right, so rather you could say, how could they build it from the side? But you don't. But we're not. But we're not arguing about minasad. Rather, we could say there's a question whether the gap is 10 or the gap is more than 10. Okay, so okay. Just a side note, one of the hard things that we're doing in Eruvin, because most nowadays Eruvin are done via Tzur Petach, that's very important thing is that when people are running the wires, right, or when you're checking an Eruv, is to make sure that the Eruv is, like the Eruv wire is al gaban, meaning it's that the Eruv wire runs directly over the over the lechi, or over the post that it is being used to make a proper Tzur Petach, because a lot of times wires, they bend out of place, so they get moved, and sometimes when they get put back on from the side. So it's important to make sure that it's actually directly over the post, over the left.
Now, if I can ask you a question,
Yes.
Maybe we'll get to this because I'm looking down on your page, that 145 picture that has a wooden structure, I guess, with the top not on top of the two posts, but on the side of it. Are we saying that people don't build like that? Because it sounds like the reason we gave for it not working when it's not on top is people don't build. But that looks like a perfectly good structure.
It's structurally sound as it is, but if you were going to be building a doorway, you would never build a doorway that way.
Okay.
Because if you're building a doorway, right, you want your doorway to be structurally sound and stay for a long time. Let's say Stonehenge. They've been standing for thousands of years. It's just 3 stones. Each of the structures, right? You got the two side posts and the one on top.
Yes.
So then that has been lasting with no screws, no nothing, just them being there for thousands of years.
Yeah, putting aside all the mysteries, agreed.
Right. So then that's the way you would build. That's the way you're supposed to build a doorpost. If you built it the other way, trying to do it from the side, true, if you nailed it in, it might stick around, but that's not a doorpost.
Right.
Sorry,
I just wondered what figure 45 is meant to be showing us. What does that material say about it?
It's showing you another way, as opposed to doing it with a wire. It's showing you if you've done it with a beam. So if you, let's say, thought, oh, maybe it's only for, for the vine, or for, right, that is a problem when it's from the side, but it'd be fine if you drilled it in. So that's showing you that it's still a problem even if you drill it in.
Okay, so that would be no good as well.
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
So
sorry, Joel.
So besides the beam, you'd still need wires for a Eruv?
Either one would work. When you're doing a sort of petach, you either need to have a beam going over the top, or you would need to have a string going over the top. For sort of petach, it doesn't need to be the top doesn't need to be structurally strong. It just needs to be in the shape of a doorway. And as far as the strength of the string is enough to hang a straw door, basically the lightest door that exists. And nowadays, since we even have stronger materials, so we know, like, so we both have stronger wires, as well as the ability to hang even lighter doors. You could make a legitimate halachic door, let's say, out of a very thin sheet of plastic, which weighs next to nothing. And you could hang, have a very small wire, let's say, whether it be like fishing line, which is very sturdy and can hold hundreds of pounds, which can definitely support the lightest doors that they sell nowadays. So yes. So then here this is just way if you're using wooden beams, but functionally what we do is nowadays mostly with strings, though you could also do it with wooden beams as well if you'd like. Just it tends not to be done because it's more expensive and also more likely to break in terms of if something hits into it or from the wind, whereas the strings are a little more flexible, so they're easier to use. All right.
Can the lechi be of the same material?
Lechi could be even thinner material. Different. Lechi is different dinim than yes, in theory, yes. Just need to make sure that it's something that, but that's something to look at. The question of how thick or thin your lechi can be. Some say that can be as thin as it can be paint, which means that it's like super really thin and barely even there. But again, that's a subject to look at whether or not for lechi it needs to be strong or just simply a heker. But for petach, you'd need to have some sort of slightly stronger structurally side pieces. That way you could that combined with the Korah over the top. Sorry, with the string or the whatever you're using for the top of the lintel could in theory hold a door. So the whole structure as a whole has to be able to hold a door. But the door is blush kash, meaning that the lightest possible material that you can make a doorway out of, not necessarily that it has to be a doorway that you would have used. You're going to hang a nice thick heavy wooden or metal door from it.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Okay, so now we are on. Okay, thank you for all the excellent questions. Hopefully, we'll be able to. We'll hopefully address more of the local ones as they come up. So now we're continuing on trying to figure out what's going on with running the strings with running vines over different types of posts. So and why would you say that that we're discussing why Rabbi Yochanan has different opinions? So we said maybe it's because the difference between the gap the third path being 10 versus it being 11.
Rabbi, I had a question on that last part of the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan is not talking about an Eruv here. He's talking about whether it would work for Chaim or not, right? Because we're trying to address the inconsistency. So why would it matter less than 10 or more that this is just for Chaim, not for our case?
Yes. But for you, the Gemara is inferring that the laws of mechitzot should work for both. Similarly, so meaning just like we were talking about there being a limit on the maximum width for Eruvin, there should also be a limit on the maximum width for kilayim. So that's what we're dealing with within kilayim. Rabbi Yochanan is kilayim, correct? But that's the case. We're saying is there a maximum wall size of an empty gap? Like, does petach apply for kilayim? According to Rish Lakish, no. As in, it can be as large as you want, no limit. For Rabbi Yochanan, there is a limit on how wide it can be for kilayim, and that's 10. And that's why. So that's why in one case he says that way that you did it was kasher, and one other case was pasul.
But he says in both cases it would be pasul for Shabbos, maybe for another reason.
Correct, probably for another reason. Could say that
okay,
you
perfect.
need stronger walls for Shabbos. Could say that that parts of the Omed is a problem for Shabbos, but not for kilayim.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, my pleasure. Okay, so we're not saying Rad Shani Lan Ben Esther Leoter Ben Esther. Don't worry about Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. Lo Kachayama says. So who does say they're talking about 10 and 11? So now we're going to rephrase our story. Here's the case. Shalach Rabbi Yeshua etzel Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri lemol Torah. Afal pi shabaki hilchot kilayim u'mitzau yoshev ben ha'ilanot u'matnos more milan leilan. So Rabbi Yeshua went to learn by Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri to learn, even though Rabbi Yeshua himself was very knowledgeable about hilchot kilayim, and he noticed that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri was sitting there between the trees and was tying stretching a vine from one tree to another tree. Diagram number 146. Okay, so he was wrapping the vine from one to the other. Amrlo, Rabbi Igafanim Khan, Mahu Lizra Khan. So if we'd had this area had been a region that's considered to be a kerem, place people plant vines, could we then able to plant these on the other side based on what you did? Amrlo, Esther Mutar, Bioter Me'asar Asur. And he responded back that if the space between these trees is 10, then you could plant on the other side because it would be considered to be valid. Well, even though it's seemingly even though it's been outside, and but but if it was wider than 10, then it would be a problem, which seems to line up very well with which is Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. That seems pretty good. So Rabbi Yochanan seems to be consistent now. So my askinan. So what's the case? So if we're talking about a case where you planted them over the top, right? Meaning, right, as we had in the diagram before, number 142. So if you want to say this, that it's more than 10 and it's on top, Hatanya, Hayusham, Kanin, Hadok Ranin, Vaslahan, Paya, Milmala, Afil Bioter Me'asar Mutar. So if you want to say that the case is by where the way they tied it is on top, but we have a bright that and then it's not, then more than 10 is a problem. So, but then we have a brighta that states that if you had posts nailed into the ground, right? So that's diagram number 146, right? Where you have stakes nailed into the ground, and then you ran the line over the top. Right, you did a pea milmala, meaning you ran the vine over the top of them. Even if it's more than 10, it works. Ella love minutes. Rather, most of the cases be that we have by the tree case, or what we're talking about is when it's from the side. The kamarlay be'aser mutar yotzer me'asar asur. So they were learning from there that that's what they do. That the case was as depicted in this diagram over in number 146. That you're right. That's the problem. That it's cut from the middle, but if let's say you see how these trees, there's they make a little V shape on top. So if you'd ran it over in the middle of the tree, then it would have like being over al gaban as opposed to being outside, then it would have been fine, right? Because then you'd have had you do the bottom of the tree as the it would be considered to be the lechi, and then you'd have put the rope, and then the rope would have been would have been over the top, and would have been fine. But that's not the case. Rather, it was tied outside. Okay, now we're going back to discuss the earlier case. So Gufa Amarav Chista Tzur Petach Chasen and Mitzad Lo Asaf Loklo. Right now we're having Rav Chista's opinion that if you do it from the side, it's no good at all, no matter what you did, no matter the size. You don't do it from the side. You don't build like that. So Amarav Chista Tzur Petach Shamru Tzriya Kashetei Bria Kadei Hamid Delat Fafil Delat Shalakashin. So we have one statement of Rav saying except from the side is no good. We also have another statement saying that what's the strength requirement for the Shor Petach is that it has to be able to hold a door, even if the door is made up out of straw. Amar Shlakish Mishum Rabbi Yanai Shor Petach Tzricha Hekeret Sir. So now another requirement we have is that of Shlakish Rabbi Yanai that it needs to have a place where you put the hinges on. My Hekeret Sir Amar Rav Avya Avkata. So when we say hinges, we mean like the strong metal or wooden hinges? No, not even something that sturdy. We mean by that he means you have to have loops, right? Because typically the way that hinges work basically is you have like a piece of either metal or wood sticking out, and then you have like that's attached to the wall, and then you have corresponding pegs on the door, and that's they're hanging on. But here he's saying that no, even if you had, because we're talking about a door of straw, so even a loops would be sufficient. You don't need to have the same. You wouldn't need to have a structurally strong one. Okay, so the Ashkinu Rav Acha Braid Rav Avil Talmidei Rav Ashi. So the one day Rav Acha, the son of Rav Avia, found the students of Rav Ashi, and he asked them a question. Amar Lahu, Amar Mar, Mi Div Tzorah. Yes, did your master Rav Ashi say anything about these Tzorah Petach? Amar Lai Lo Amar Lo. And they said he never said anything about it. Meaning that, so that implies that the question we had above. So I was wondering, did he happen to have addressed the case of do you need loops or not? And the answer is nope, he said nothing, implying that you don't actually need to have hinges for the door. Okay, now continuing. Tana, another Breta. Tzorah Petach Shamru, Kana, Mikan, Makana, Al Gabehan. So when we say Tzorah Petach, we mean a post on this side, post on the other side, and then a post across the top. Tzrichin Liga, Oen Tzrichin Liga, do they need to touch or not? Rav Nachman Amar, Ein Tzrichin Liga, Rav Sheshet Amar Tzrichin Liga. Rav Nachman says they need to touch, Rav Sheshet says they don't need to touch. So, right, so that's diagram number 149.
Would that mean whether they need to loop or not?
No, whether or not, when you put this, we're talking about the 3 beams now.
Yeah.
So there they say that you would need to do they need to be rested? Does the kanet, the piece of wood for the tap have to touch the other 2? So that's the question.
Okay.
So let's not talk about whether that has to touch or not. So Azal Rav Nachman v'Avad Uvda Beiresh Geluta Krishmatei. So Rav Nachman went and did what he'd heard, meaning he did it. Meaning he right before Rav Nachman says they don't need to touch. That's what he did. Then Amarle Rav Sheshet l'Shamei Rav Gada. So then Rav Sheshet told the servant Rav Gada, like his shamish, his helper. So Zil Shlof Shadinu. Then he says go and take them out because we did is no kosher. Azal Shalosh Shadinu. So then he went out and he took me to them away. Ashkechu the Beiresh Geluta Chavshu. And then the people of Beiresh Geluta saw this, and then they imprisoned him for destroying their Eruv. Azal Rav Sheshet Kab Abava, and then Rav Sheshet went out to the door of the prison and said, Amarle Gada Pukta Navagrata. And then he said, "Other go to me," and then the Beiresh Geluta let them go. Because basically, so that's a story that you should never do. Even if you don't necessarily approve of somebody's Eruv, you probably should never destroy it because people get very upset when you destroy their Eruvs. As in that case, where he literally got arrested for destroying the Eruv and making the Reish Luta the head of the Jews in exile time. So they were very upset and they put him in jail. Then he's like, no. Then the Rav Machshir of the Eruv, Rav Nachman then went and said, no, it's like let him go, and they were like, fine, we'll let him go. But yeah, he got arrested for it. So now we're trying to figure out what the what is the story of the Tzorah Petach. So Ashkei Rav Sheshet l'Rav Bar Shmuel Amar Lei Tani Mar Midi Tzorah Petach says teach you something about Tzorah Petach. Amar Lei in sure Tanina Kipa Rimeir Chaim Mezuzah Chacham and Potri. So we're talking about a case of a kippah, which is a kippah simply means an arch, right? So that's number 150. So if you have an arched doorway, the question is that chayiv? So what is the status in terms of the zazah? So Remeir says it needs mezuzah. Chacham say that since it's round, so therefore there's no case because there's no mezuzah. Right? Normally there's the biblical term for the sides is mezuzot. Right? And then the one on top is called a mashkof. Right? So in the Torah, lach and korah are the terms in the Mishnah. So he's saying there that if you don't have so Chaim is saying that if you don't have actual mezuzot, there aren't 2 straight things, and then there's mashkof on top, therefore there's no chayiv mezuzah there. V'shavin she'im yesh ragla eser he chayavet. But even the Chachamim agree that if there's a straight point before the arch of 10, right? Look at number 151. So if let's say the arch is only at the top as opposed to the whole way through, then that would be fine. So Amar Abaye Hakol Modim Im Gavoa Sarab Ein Bergla Shlosha. Then Abaye has something has a different thing for what's required for a mezuzah. He says that if it's 10 tall and the feet aren't even 3 tvachim, right? So then that would be the case where nobody ever agrees you don't need that even or Meir wouldn't say it requires a mezuzah. Inami, or another way of saying that Yesh Bergla Shlosha Ve'ein Gavoa Sarab Lo Klum. Or the other way of saying that what's the case everybody agrees is that if it's the legs are 3 but the total has a doorway is less than 10 tvachim, then that's not considered to be a valid doorway for mezuzah because you don't have sufficient you don't have sufficient doorway. So then what's the case of argument then? Keep ligi Yesh Beragla Shlosha Goa Sara. There are cases where if it's 3 tall and if it's 3 on the side and it's also 10 tall in general. But it's not wider than 4. But you could, in theory, chisel away from the top to make it end up being the right size. So that's that's image number 153, where basically currently it's not right. Or in theory, you could chisel out a full doorway of the right size. And that's the case where the machloket is one that you can view it as if you already cut it out. Whereas case where let's say number 154 where there isn't enough, then that would be invalid. So Rabbi Meir says that you viewed it that you carve out the area that you can carve it out and then it'll be fine. Rabban says no, that you don't allow you to view it as if you carved it out. Rather, if it's currently no good, then it's no good, no way to fix it, and that's that. So Amarlai Imish Kakalahu Lo Temalai Leverish Gluta Lo Midi Maha Matitikipa. If you find them, don't say anything about this Braita to the Hezresh Gluta, because this proves that I was wrong and I was deservedly thrown in jail. Because basically, this is showing you that in terms of the Surah Petach, that right. So he was saying that using the kana on each side is no good. But here, this is the case clearly saying that what he had done in terms of doing the Surah Petach was legitimate, and he doesn't want to be thrown in jail. Again, for being wrong. So. And now, just one side point. So the Yerushalmi on this topic has another din in terms of the talking about the how you do the beam across the top for a sort of petach, and it mentions a gumi. It mentions the fact that you could use a string explicitly. So based on the Yerushalmi is why nowadays a lot of the errors we use a string over the top as opposed to using a beam or of some sort or a vine. We say that a string is good enough, as is mentioned by the Yerushalmi. Okay. So we're going to keep going. We'll see how far we can get. Hopefully, we'll be able to. We'll see if we can manage to finish tomorrow's daf too. If not, I'll try and we'll so we'll try and see how far we can get to tomorrow's daf. That way we can be on pace so we can cover Shabbat, the daf before Shabbat. So we'll be able to be done with Shabbat daf on time. Hopefully finish till the next time in the middle. So for the next 10 minutes, please hold off on the questions just so we can make sure we cover enough ground. That way we can be on pace for the week. Manitin Hechsher Mavoy. How do you fix a Mavoy? Beishamai Omrim Lechi V'Kora. V'Hel Omrim Olechi Okora. Right? We went over this before. That when you're trying to fix an entrance to the Mavoy, either you can have a side beam and a post on top. According to Beishamai, so you need both of them to fix it. Whereas Beit says one or the other. Rabbi Elazar Omer L'Chaim. But Rabbi Elazar says you need to have two lechis, two side posts. Bishur Bishmal Amar Talmud Echad Lefnei Rabbi Akiva Onatzku B'Shamid Hillel Al Mavoi Shebachot Me'arba Amot. They weren't arguing about it less than 4 Amot. Shehu Deed Shehu Nitar Obalechi Obakor. If it's that short, then either one works. Al Manach. What are they arguing about? Al Racham Me'arba Amot. So rather the case isn't for the when it's 4 wide, rather it's when it's between 4 and 10 wide is the question. Beit Shammai Omrim Lechi Okora, Beit Hillel Omrim Lechi Okora. Once you've got a large enough space, then it needs a different way of fixing it, because when you have a large doorway versus a very small doorway. So Amar Rabbi Akiva Al Zev Nechaku. No, Rabbi Akiva was like, no, they argue no matter what. The question is, how do you fix entry to Mavoi? Period. Come on. Right. So then who's this Mishnah following? Rather, this must not be according to Chananya. This isn't like Chananya nor like the Tanakama. So who's the whole Mishnah actually following then? Because the Tanakama doesn't make mention of doesn't make mention of the case about there being on 2 sides. So Amar of Yehuda, Havekamar, Hashir Mavoi Satum Keta. So where Yehuda says, wait, so what's the case where we have to fix a Mavoi that's only open on one side? B'Shamei Amrim Lechi B'Kora, B'Hillel Amrim Olechi B'Kora. So we're talking about we have a 3-sided Mavoi, and practically only the last side, which has been the basically been using for most of the years so far. If that's the case, that's what Mechloked is. B'Shamei Amrim Lechi B'Kora. Beit Shammai requires both the side post and the beam across the top, the cross beam. So that seems that Beit Shammai requires you to have 4 full walls, and that's why you need to have both the side post and the cross beam on top. No, low Lizrok. No, that's not a valid proof if that's where Beit Shammai holds. Lizrok Mishalosh Shud Machaya L'Totel Ad Ik Arba. No, that's not necessarily the case. Rather, they're just talking in terms of differentiation in terms of what needs to be fixed. Because if there's only 3 walls, if you want to be able to throw things around in the area, you only need 3 walls. But if you want to be able to tell, adik arba. But if you want to actually carry things in the area, you need to have 4 walls. Okay, so now Beit Hillel says you need either a cross beam or a side post. Why maybe Beit Hillel says that for it to be considered to be a Rishut Yachid, it needs 3 walls either, right? No, rather no. That's not what the argument is. Rather, he says that if there's 2 walls, then you're chayav on zrika. You're allowed to throw if there's 2, but you're not allowed to carry in the area until there's 3 walls. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Lechayayin, and then Rabbi Eliezer said that we needed 2 posts. Rabbi Eliezer Lechayayin Ukor Kamar. So the question is, Rabbi Eliezer, is he building off of let's say Beit Shammai, saying more than Beit Shammai, or is he saying that different from entirely from Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel? He's just saying that you need 2 lechis and that's it. Tashma Master Rabbi Eliezer Shahalach Etzel Rabbi Yossi Ben Bredo Tamido, turning the same page. Lo'ovalim. So Rabbi Eliezer is going to his student Rabbi Yossi Preda, who lives in Ovalim. And he saw that Rabbi Yossi was sitting there when there's only 1 lechi on the side of it. Amarlo Beni Asay Lechi. He said, Rabbi Eliezer said, make another one. Amarlo V'chilu Sotmon Yitzarach. We need to make a full seal. It's a mavoi. All I need to do is remind me. Amarlo Yisatem Umabakach. So then Talmud says so then Rabbi Eliezer is like, yeah, so you should close it off. Like, I don't understand, why are you arguing with me? So Amar Shimon ben Gamliel. So now we're gonna have a different case. So before the question was right. So Rabbi Eliezer said you have to do 2 posts, and he was and that was it. So now we're going back to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Now Rabbi Gamliel is going to go back to talk about Beit Shammai Beit Hillel, opposed to Rabbi Eliezer opinion. So lo nachgu Beit Shammai Beit Hillel al mavoi shubachor me'arba amot she'eno tzarech klum. Amad nechaku al rachab me'arba amot v'ad aser. So the case they argue isn't only that's subject to machloket of do you need a side post or a beam across beam verbose is if it's between 4 and 10. Right? So that's the case where Mishnah has a machloket. So Tani Mihat but what about the case from what we mentioned just now about they're talking about do you need to close up the whole area? I understand you're talking about Lachi, you're requiring both Lachis and Akora, Mishum Haki, Amar, V'chilas, Anitzar. I understand you want to say he's fully closing it off if you did it both on the side and on the top. Al Iyamar, Lachayayin, below Korah, miles. But if you were saying the two sidewalls are no Korah, how are you saying that he's closing it off? Halikamar, see, this is what he already should have said as follows. No, because he said, V'chilas, Lachayayin, Anitzar. Well, he was saying, do I need to use two Lachis? He wasn't saying anything about is this a full wall or not. He's stating that what is sufficient to close there off. So Amar Mar, Amar Bishum Ben Gamliel, Lenachlu Bisham Et Hillel, Al Mavush Bachom Me'arba, Shem Tarat Klum. They both agree you don't need to fix it at all. Ha'anan Tanan, Mishum Rabbi Yishmael, Amar Talmid Echad L'Pnei Rabbi Akiva, Nolachlu Bisham Et Hillel, Al Mavush Bachom Me'arba Amot Shu Nitar O B'Lechi B'Korah. So now we're talking about the case between 0 and 4, and so even though we have Rishon and Gamliel stating that they didn't argue at all, but we're like, wait, we have another Mishnah that says that they are arguing over the case from 0 to 4. The question was, he says for both for Beit Hillel and for Beit Shammai, a lechi or a korah is good enough for less than 4. So wait, so which one is it? What's the opinion of Beit Shammai and Hillel in the case less than 4? For the width of the mavoi, so Amar Ravashi Hachikamar. And let's start like a korah to Beit Shammai. Rather, Ravashi is what we say that you don't need a lucky and a korah unless they're 4 like Beit Shammai. Rather, between the case in the case of less than 4, you need only halachas like Rabbi Hillel is in general. Makama, and then we're asking, so how much is on the minimum size? So what is there a minimum where you require nothing? So Ravakli Arba. So Ravakli says 4. Basically, we're going back to Lovewood here, right? So he says that according to the Lovewood is 4 tvachim, so that's the so if it's less than that, then therefore you wouldn't need anything because if it's closed. Amar Sheshet, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Bar Abba, Amar Rav Modim Chachamim, Rabbi Eliezer Pasich Hatzer. So Sheshet, the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah Bar Abba, the name of Rav says that Chachamim agreed to Rabbi Eliezer in the case of Pasich Hatzer, meaning by the upright boards of the Chatzer, that you would need nothing. If it's surrounded by those, you wouldn't need anything to fix it. Or not one Amar Halach Rabbi Eliezer Pasich Hatzer. Or not one agrees and says that Pasich Hatzer, you wouldn't need anything else to fix it. There is there a picture of it? No, no picture. Basically, that means if you have a Chatzer surrounded by posts all over, which basically means you're surrounded by, you've got an area enclosed by many different lachis, then that would be sufficient, and you wouldn't need anything else to fix it. So Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Modi. What do you mean by you agree? Halakha Michlal Pligi. If you say halakha, something means that they argue. Man Pligi. Elias, who don't argue? Rabbanan. Tanya Chatzer Niteret Pasachad. Who says that you don't need that Rabbanan say that you only need one pas in order to permit a breach. Rabbi Omer Shtei Pasin. Then he requires you to have 2 pasin, which is much more difficult to allow an area. Amar Rabbi Yossi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Chatzer Tzricha Shnei Pasin. So Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yochanan says that to permit a gap in a Chatzer, you need to have 2 posts on each side of the gap. Amar Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Yossi, Mi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says that. V'ha Achud Amar Bishmei to Rabbi Yochanan. Didn't you tell us that Rabbi Yochanan said differently? Pasek Chatzer Tzricha Shehei Ben Arba. You said that nothing needs to. Rather, it needs to be the board has to be 4 tvachim wide. Maybe you meant the gap you have to make it small enough so the gap is less than 4. But didn't we say something differently that we're talking about there's between a small and a large courtyard? It's the difference between whether it's between 10 and 11 amot. So what are we talking? So what are you talking about? The case of lessening the gap all the way till it being 4 tvachim. Like that's completely the wrong measurements. Like what's going on? So one day when Rabbi Zera came off of the boat. He says, "Ruach achad ba'arba, mishtei ruchot, mashu lakan, mashu lakan." So it says that if you're only trying to fix from one end, you need a pas of 4. But if you're doing it from both sides, then you need to have then any amount is good. And what we said in the name of Rabbi Rami is the name of Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Yossi, which is that and holds that Lavud is for 3, and that's why you need to have it be at least 4 in order for it to work. In order for it to work in terms of the making the gap ended up being less than 4. So okay, so we're gonna stop there and continue here next time because we're out of time. So just a quick summary. Today we dealt a lot with Surah HaPetach on how you're supposed to build it. So important to remember about Surah HaPetach is that Surah HaPetach is a shape of a doorway. It has to be built like a strong functional doorway would be, meaning that it has to have side posts. It needs to have a beam running over the top, directly over the top, not attached from the side. And as far as the strength, we mentioned that the strength has only able to hold a door made out of straw. So the Yerushalmi states explicitly that you can do it with a gumi with a string. So as long as you have a sufficiently strong string, then that running directly over the top of the post is sufficient for making sort of petach for constituting a wall for Eruvin. And remember don't apply that if you do it from the side, that it would be no good. And also remember that the type of sort of petach we're talking about is not a sort of petach that has a door hanging from hinges. Rather, it's a door that we're hanging from the top, and that's why hinges are unnecessary as well. If anybody has any questions now, they're welcome to ask them. And tomorrow we will be picking up from Amar of Yosef.
Rabbi, in the case of the kippah, where we're talking about the minimum requirements where you would have to put up a mezuzah, those are really small. We're not talking about an actual. That seems like a dollhouse. Like, what are we talking about there?
So let me scroll back up just to look at the diagrams. Okay, so when we say 10 tvachim tall, right? 10 tvachim tall is right, comes up to like about a little less than 3 feet, which is pretty high. So and then,
3 tvachim.
When we say 3 tvachim, we're saying it's a question of how you built you see in diagram number 154. So the 3 tvachim is stating the amount of straight wall there is. Right. So then, if you let's say if you're heading let's say by the kotel, there's when you're heading in there's a whole bunch of different arches of different amounts of exposure. Right. So there's the really big one where you'd go in. Let's say when you're going into like basically attached to the kotel, like that big archway. But also, if you look further back, there's a very small one that's like it's basically like your head almost like you can't you have to like duck to get into that one. Right. So that one's more than 10, like so that one basically it's also rounded the whole way from the floor. Right. So the question is so is that one sufficient? Right? So cases like that. So a lot of times when you're making archways, a lot of them aren't intentionally doorways. They just happen to end up being like let's say the one of the biggest construction projects of the Romans were aqueducts. The way they would typically support the aqueducts if they're it was a series of archways. So then you'd have a lot of times you'd have an archway that's very small, or that's like largely covered over, and then you have like some amount left over. So this wasn't necessarily intended. Nobody really meant this to be functionally as a doorway per se when it was originally constructed, but it happens to be a doorway. Right. So that's why you end up getting with all these weird shapes and structures of different sizes. Not necessarily that somebody would try to build a house this way. Sometimes because that happens to be a feature of the building for another reason, but it can function as a doorway as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Chodesh Tov, be well.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Everybody.
Bye-bye.
I'll see everybody on Rosh Chodesh as well tomorrow.